helping him out at the time, right? And so his grasp of the English language wasn't that great. So we would have to help him out, right, by saying, hey, you know, here's the drummer and he can pound, right? So you know, we helped him out. Or I shouldn't say we, I did. So I was his interpreter because, you know, my mother's Mexican, so I can kind of understand what he's saying sometimes. And so I was his interpreter. So he goes, Mugger, can you tell him what I'm saying? And I can understand what he's saying, but a lot of other people couldn't fucking understand what he's saying.
when we were down there behind Unicorn, you and Robo was, it's really you were in charge of him, but he would order you around.
Oh yeah, well, he's probably 10 years older than me. But
you were decking out the van,
making the van
tour ready.
So in Torrance, right, so we had this little spot in downtown Torrance, and the Torrance cops are fucking Nazis, right? And so back then we had people like Spot, you know, black guy, and Robo, Colombian, who they thought was a Mexican, right? So they're like looking at us, you guys are dealing drugs or whatever. And so this guy came in with a trench coat, right, and he's like walking around back, and it's in the back, and it's kind of like in the alley. And he's like walking around and he's doing like this shit, right? He's like going, hey, what's up, bro? And I'm saying, what's up, bro? Or whatever back in the time. And then he's got his can, right? He's got his can on the side there, and we open it up and it's a Bud Light. I go, what kind of fucking bum is gonna? At that point, that I knew it was the cops because he's like talking, asking me questions, right? And it's like, what kind of bum is going to be fucking drinking a Bud Light, right? And at that point,
yeah, it was all about Colt 45.
Yeah, Colt 45 or you know,
Cobra,
Cobra, right? And so at that point we thought, you know, and they're following us at this point. There's people like we're looking at us, and there's fucking people following us, right? And we're going, we're just fucking making music, right? And sharing love, right? Or maybe Spot was sharing love, right? So anyways, and then we were on tour, and Mike Watt was in the spot, and I don't know, some other people were in the spot, and the cops just went in and raided it. And they went to our distributor, right? They went to our distributor, and they said, because I was the only one picking up the albums in Alhambra at Verco,
yeah.
Right? And so I was picking them up and I was bringing them back, and then we were UPSing them out, and they were following me, right?
Gym. You were going to gym?
I'm going to gym, and I'm the guy working 12 hours a week while these guys are sitting in drinking coffee and fucking jerking off or whatever they're doing. Well, I was working my fucking ass off, but the cops were following us, right?
Yeah. They went into Jim and opened all the boxes, and Jim told you guys that later.
Yeah. I
was up in Berkeley at Systematic Distribution. I was on the phone. You picked up the phone when the cops were in the Torrance SST, and I kept trying to find out, you know, Spot was non-committal, and he kept saying, I don't know, when I asked him what was going on. And you handed the phone to Mike Watt, and he told me the cops are here.
Oh, that was the day that they
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I never did place my order.
But the place was fucking floored. I mean, there was shit all over the place when we got back.
They opened everything.
They opened everything up. We're selling cocaine at this point. We're fucking Robo.
So they find nothing, and then what? What did they do?
Well, they kind of couldn't do anything, really.
But you were out of Torrance then.
Yeah. No, that was what, 81 when you guys went on to the East Coast.
Yeah, early 81.
81.
And then
summer.
They decided on Henry while they were on the East Coast. They came back through Chicago, where I was visiting family, and Des was still the singer. Henry's with them, and that's where I went up to Greg and said I'd come down and run the office you know, if they needed someone for when they're touring. And he said, well, we don't have an office anymore, you know, because, and I just told him, well, you know, I'm interested in being in LA and getting out of the, you know, the Berkeley Bay Area. And so, you know, I didn't know where I was coming into when, you know, I saw you guys then later with, I believe with Henry singing, you know, San Francisco probably was some of those first shows. And then after the gig in San Francisco, you guys went back down, and then you came up with the van, and I put all my stuff in the van and moved it to Phelan, but the office was on Santa Monica Boulevard at that point. And you were finishing up the Damaged album with Henry's vocals, and that was probably the third time or fourth time you had recorded half of those songs. But it came out then in November 1981, or maybe early December, officially.
Yeah.
And
it was a pain in the butt.
yeah, and then of course touring had to happen. But before the record came out, the deal changed from MCA, which was kind of a, you know, Greg's coup, is he found the Unicorn label had MCA distribution, and but we didn't understand that that Unicorn wasn't making any money, and MCA was looking for a reason to dump them, and but they were so out of it. I mean, you know, people who were into the hippie era in the industry had no conception of punk rock. They were like Torrance cops. They thought they were going to find drugs or, you know, machine guns or something.
Yeah, they were bad actors in a bad script.
Yeah, and so the MCA head calls the Damaged album an anti-parent record, and he thinks he's going to be cheered by society, you know, for putting his foot down. And Greg and Chuck both had friends in the industry who were, you know, people who talked to people, and apparently Al Bergamo at the MCA had called Rolling Stone magazine and asked about Black Flag, and they said exactly the same thing apparently as Torrance cop would have said. You know, it was just like beyond the pale, and no problem putting the kibosh on them. And so suddenly we had to cover up the MCA logo on the covers with the Al Bergamo quote. As a parent, I found this an anti-parent record. That was the exact quote.
Yeah, it made this those little stickers.
Yeah. So it went right over this giant MCA logo. We didn't know though that the independent economy of Pickwick, it was at that point it wasn't the independent labels that were doing rock music were leaving for the majors. Eventually, even the R&B people left for the majors because the glory days of the open FM radio economy of the 70s was about done. You know, it was 81, and Chrysalis, you know, had been distributed by Pickwick and other independents, and but they weren't selling many records. So, you know, in retrospect, that was a disaster because you know, from 81 to probably 84, not only you didn't get royalties for the Damaged album, the best-selling record we had, it probably sold 50,000 in LA and another 20,000 around the country. We had lawyers' fees of, you know, we got a deal, and it still was probably $200 an hour to fight Unicorn, which had free legal services because of Daphne's. She was a widow of a lawyer who was connected, and they fronted her all this and then lost. So, but it meant that we we took some of the Black Flag tour revenues to press the old records, Nervous Breakdown, Jealous Again, Six Pack, and the first Minutemen records. But you know, the Minutemen, Sacred Trust, even the Meat Puppets early on, they didn't sell any records. You got to 1,000 sales pretty quickly, but it took us probably till the end of '83 to have a cash flow with the records we could release. And then in '84, Black Flag was free to do My War and Slip It In, and but certainly the joy was out of the band. Spot left the touring aggregate probably after the Damage tours.
1980.
82.
Yeah, I had my last tour with them, I guess, was the first UK tour, which would have been in December of '81. So
that was it.
It was yeah, because it was about '82 when, you know, suddenly I had a chance of either doing the studio work or going on the road and doing sound work, and at least in the studio work, you know, I didn't have to be in a van with a lot of smelly laundry. So and there was a chance that I actually put a few bucks in my pocket, you know. So yeah, I just kind of had to make that decision in '82, and
you were also protecting your hearing for studio work versus. You know, a lot of these tours were in unorthodox places with inadequate PAs, would you say?
Some of them 50-50 at best.
And then you become the sound man.
So the incident where Spot touched me in media art, at that point he was teaching me how to do sound, and I'm joking.
Yeah,
I was actually his assistant, and then we went on the road. And then he's teaching me, you know, I mean, we're like, kind of like two brothers, like my older brother. So he's teaching me all this stuff in the studio, and so then I took over. But again, like the, you know, up there ordering a salad, Spot is more of a person that has to think a lot about what he's going to do. He's not just going to, so get in the fucking van, bro.
I ain't thinking, man.
You're a thinking man, right?
I was going to say, I mentioned to Mugger that one of my favorite pictures of their early tour was in Maximum Rock and Roll, which you know, at first they were really into Black Flag. Then they would qualify it by saying they're the best live band, and that meant that they didn't really like their lyrics, and they didn't like the jokes or the talk and stuff on the radio, and
Does Slip It In offended them?
well, this is even before that. But anyway, they had that weird caveat. But anyway, at some point they were interviewing MDC, who's from Texas, and they were the ideal band for Maximum Rock and Roll. They were communists from Texas, and in the interview, one of the guys in MDC is complaining. He's going, yeah, you know, Black Flag, those records are so great. They're so righteous and angry. And then they pull up and pile out of the van, and Mugger says, dudes, where are the broads? And Maximum Rock and Roll knew just what they meant.
We're touring, man. I mean, we're having fun.
Well, and they're the boys' club of the skinheads, or you know, whatever. Whatever the
Are skinheads communist, Linda?
Not anymore.
Oh, okay. Back then, skinheads.
Are they just Nazis? I don't think Nazis were communists. They were Catholic, but not communist.
Anyways, Joe and I,
they were Marxists.
Joe and I were in New York, and we did the same thing in New York and Brooklyn. And so I came up with a term that, you know, we broke it into like 3 eras in this situation. And the first era that we're talking about now, and it's the Avengers song, you know, We Are the One. And Spot and I, and Linda was in New York with us, right? And so Spot and I, and all of us, we would do anything. We were like, you know, the Jim Jones, and, you know, like it was a religion for us. We worked our fucking asses off, you know. We would work 12 hours a day, there's still flyers in Huntington Beach on the fucking poles where we would go out and we would put flyers, you know, everywhere that there was a gig, we would work.
You'd hit all the high schools.
We would hit all the
greater
high schools
LA
because
map.
we wanted all the high school chicks there at the time, right? So we would go and we would go everywhere, but we were the one. We would do anything, and we weren't communists, we weren't fascists, we weren't Marxists. You know, we were the ones, right? And so what happened is that after the damaged era, right, it became like, you know, people started to get paranoid, and people started maybe smoking weed and getting older, and so it sort of like broke up. And so I came up with the term that DD Detroit, I don't know if anyone knows UXA, but we started to get paranoid. Hey, you stole my chick, bro, what's up with that, right? And so everyone started to not like each other and not hang out with each other. And then we have this guy here, Jordan Schwartz, right? who came up. They came up with their own, like record label, and they came up with their own touring stuff. And so it was like me and Joe, and Spot's like Switzerland, right? Everyone likes Spot, right? It was like me and Joe, right? And then Jordan Schwartz and Zukowski and
Global.
So they came up with their whole like thing, because Joe and I, you know, we're get in the van, we want to do things. We don't want to sit and wait fucking an hour for you to order your salad, right? We want to do business, right? And so that became sort of the friction.
Well, one of the big forks that you should talk about is the separation of the SST record company. The record company was in Hawthorne, and then Global, the booking agency, and the practice pad was in Redondo.
Yeah,
right. Well, that was the big. It was a physical split.
Yeah, at first they were staying at Phelan SST. In
Oh yeah,
Redondo,
you guys were crashing
and
them.
walking down a block to practice, but I think you guys got more and more space. You know, Pettibone thinks you stole that building from him because he was in there for his studio.
Yeah.
And Raymond believes everyone. Well, how would he put it? That he fronted everything that was done, and he hated it all, and he bears no responsibility. But he does like to take credit for the first. I think he bought the Moose Lodge for that night, the first Black Flag gig, and so that that went on. That's a whole other subplot. But the thing, to get back to the beginning, Greg had the gift of inspiring people. And
Jim Jones.
You knew there was nobody. You didn't want to be with MDC if you could be. I mean, I wasn't set on being in the record business for a profession, but I had helped build this distribution of independent label stuff in the punk era, and I thought, well, I'm either going to quit or I'm going to go down, and SST would put me closer to the bands and the creation of the music, and maybe I liked that Minutemen first single, and I knew they had an album and a Saccharine Trust album in the can, and some other stuff, Overkill and the Stains, which I hadn't heard. But I thought, well, maybe that would be the label that we sort of needed to sell records at Systematic, which unfortunately mostly were self-band released records by people who had no idea, who might play their record or who might review it. I mean, you had Slash, magazine and Flipside in Los Angeles. You had Maxim Rock and Roll in San Francisco. Those were kind of nationally known. And New York Rocker in New York was another one. But there really wasn't 10 places to send a free record to. That was common knowledge in those days, and there wasn't hardcore on college radio in general terms. So, but Greg, you knew that something was going to happen.
So,
and that the cops were not going to stop him.
So at this time, about this time of the you know, that we are the one, then we get into we're paranoid. And so we kept growing, right? Our business kept growing. And at that point, they offered me, you know, a share of the company, which was, at that point, it was me, Chuck Dukowski, and Greg 1/3. And then we brought Joe down, and so then we were 4, right? So we had 25% ownership. And we could go through SST-01, SST-02, SST-03, you know, we could go through all the music. And so we did the split, you know, where we had, it's not we, it was just kind of like, what's the cheapest place we can buy at the time? Because the records were coming in and they're stacking up. And so where do we put things? You know, we got kicked out of, you know, we got kicked out of Torrance. We're not going to go to Torrance because there's fucking Nazis there, right? And so where do we go? Where do we go next? So we kept building, and we kept getting bigger, and then that became the vision, because Joe and I, you know, Joe and I wanted to do certain music, and we, you know, we were paying the bands. You know, I was in control of the money, and at that point, I would get all the money that we would get, and I would just say, hey, we got this much money. Fuck, that's a lot of money, right? And I would just take it and I would divide it up, you know, equally amongst the bands. And so everyone, you know, everyone was happy, and, you know, it's kind of like, you know, it was a good thing at that point.
Well, you were the money guy on tour, I think, for the
money guy. I would get the money. I would split it up.
So Greg gave you that position, but then, you know, we started doing the Meat Puppets and Husker Du and St. Vitus, and the Minutemen started selling, and the Meat Puppets started selling, and, you know, so, you know, we needed like a 6-month plan and an envelope for cash flow and to keep records in print. And then we got the damaged record back. Black Flag was free, so they did like 4 albums in the first year after, you know, not being able to do anything. And so at that point they kind of resented. I always thought they sort of like to wake up in the morning and decide what to do today. And that run up against, you know, our plan that was trying to build out towards a 6-month idea of, you know, records that are new, records that are back in print, and where, you know, that we'd have the money to do all of that. And they wanted to buy a new truck or build a PA, or they, you know, some stuff that would have just set us back to, you know, the church days or something.
Well, what in essence they wanted us to take out big ads just for Black Flag and these you know, Spin and Rolling Stones and all this other area, all these other magazines, and so we're more like, you know, we were like more like SST. This is a communist sort of, you know, everyone's equal, and we're gonna post these ads that advertise all of our music, as opposed to just this monster band called, you know, Black Flag. And so it became like sort of like you know, a division between us, right, and the global. And then that's where the next step of the phase is My War, right, which is, that guy's wearing a freaking Cubs hat too. I mean, we're in LA. I mean, I can't believe this, man. Anyways, we should be wearing LA hats, right?
Hey,
fucking
be
Cubs.
glad I'm not wearing an Astros hat.
Fuck you. Anyway, so it became like My War. You're one of them. You said you're my friend, right? And so it became this like there was this hatred, you know, and it became like a relationship where, and we've all been in a relationship where the other person, you know, starts to say stuff and it just broke down. And at that point, that's when Joe said, "Fuck this."
Do you think it says anything about people taking themselves too seriously? That whole thing.
Well, let's talk about Black Flag itself at that point, because Dez becomes the second guitarist when Henry joins, and
Which is what he wanted to do, really.
Right, he wanted to play guitar, and he's a great guitarist, and his voice couldn't, I don't think he had a voice for that third week of the tour, and so Henry's voice, you know, goes forever, so he was the perfect guy. But that 5-piece at that time, right after Damaged, because if you think about the albums, the real problem in the discography is that Damaged, those are the songs written for one guitar. It's Greg Ginn playing the guitar. But it's recorded with two guitars. My War and Slip It In are the songs written for two guitars. They're played with one guitar. Because...
and no bass player.
Right, the same.
well, yeah. If you really...
Dale.
Bass player with no rhythm. White guy.
You went in with Black Flag for Slip It In really only 3 months after you did My War. And if they had waited that long and My War was solid like Slip It In, it would have been the album we kind of thought we were working towards. But it still wouldn't have had the second guitar, which those demos from '82, when the band included Chuck Biscuits from
Yes,
VOA,
you got to talk about that.
and Des on second guitar, and that version of My War with the two guitars, I mean, that's what that song was live for. You know, we're hearing it for a year, and they weren't playing it live so much, but we heard it, and because you know, and that demo is inadequate, to say the least. It's a live to 2-track, 1-take thing for the band to kind of get their bearings on, learn the songs.
There was the live to 2-track thing that we did, but then there was also like a full-blown multi-track as well.
That was the Black Coffee single idea. It was very slow so that they could be tight. It's like Greg would have been happy with any speed as long as it was tight. And they did, I think it was Black Coffee, and what was the B-side? I Love You or something. It was supposed to be 7-inch demo.
We're all looking at Linda as our...
So with the demo, there's the Biscuits demo. It's called '82, but that's where they do the Dezo songs too, right? They do the songs off the DC3 record. Did you record that spot?
The DC3?
Yeah, where Black Flag with Biscuits is playing Des tunes, and then it's Slip It In, My War.
Yeah.
Well, what about the 2 song?
I don't even know what the fuck you're talking about.
They were so Nixon over there, you didn't even know that.
Well, that was a little before my time.
Oh. Well, anyway, there was an additional thing which I don't have, so I don't remember anything except it was so slow because, you know,
Anti-punk.
well, it was also just you know, they fired Chuck Biscuits and Greg fired Chuck Dukowski. So he was slowing it down so those guys could lock in. And I mean, when I heard it, I probably said the wrong thing. I said I wouldn't release it. And I don't know if Greg thought I was saying I wouldn't release it.
I refuse, yeah.
I mean, I just thought if I were him, but you know, I haven't heard that since, you know, Phelan Avenue, so I shouldn't say that, you know, that I still believe that, but anyway, you'd say things like that and suddenly, you know, Greg was like the big scissors, you know, it's like you said the wrong thing. And
everything went black, right? Had the Pettibone scissors on it, right?
Yeah.
Cut us out.
So then you weren't part of the Brain Trust anymore, you were just those record guys over there on Phelan or wherever we went. We were behind Greg's sister's house in Redondo in the garage for a while. Then we were in Lawndale for a while. Then we were in Hawthorne for a while, and then I left in '86, and I was going to leave irregardless. So it wasn't. I didn't leave earlier when it seemed like you know, Greg didn't want us around. So if that had been the issue, I would have left, 2 years earlier maybe. But it was you know, Black Flag ended in '86, so that seemed like the normal, you know, time to, you know, he was going to have time, and it was going to be your problem at that point.
No, at this point, I mean, we had inertia, right? The train was going. We were putting out records. We had money. We were paying stuff. We were paying people, and then so it became like, who do we you know, sign next? You know, so it was like Sonic Youth became the question, and it was this argument. You know, should we sign them? Shouldn't we sign them? Bad Brains. And all this other stuff that we were doing, and we had the inertia, we were paying stuff, and it was going great, and then he left, right, and then it became like this, it was 2-on-1 at that point on, you know, do we sign Zoog's Rift, do we sign, you know, some of these other bands, it's like, you can't say anything, right, and if you said anything, right, it was like, oh, you know, you're not a musician, right, you don't know anything about music.
Chuck and Greg versus you.
It was Chuck and Greg, so it wasn't like at that point Joe and I, which were, you know, which we like certain things, and it's pragmatic. You know, this will do something, right? As opposed to going out on a limb and giving somebody $20,000 at that time, which is probably about $100,000 now, to do this album that's going to sell 2,000. It's not pragmatic, right? What are you going to do? Are you going to make money from it? No.
Well,
right?
we had cash flow as of the beginning of '85, so that's when I told Greg that from then on we could do anything he wanted to release. You know, send us a tape because we'd like to hear it, but if you want to release it, we'll release it. So I was just sort of, you know, kind of underlining that, you know, this is my consideration, this was still his label. The problem had been we didn't have money to you know, go off in a new direction, and when we did, that's when I told him we could. And so at that point, we're doing internal bands like DC3 and Tricoli's Dog and SWA. But then St. Vitus is in there earlier, and Husker Du, the Meat Puppets, Subhumans and the Dicks from Texas, those were a couple you brought in because you were already on your way to Texas, probably.
Kind of, yeah.
You liked it there and were trying to get out of LA.
I loved it there.
More chicks.
More chances for chicks.
More horses. But
No horses.
but anyway, those two albums I always felt bad about because they came out at the worst time. We had no cash.
Who, you mean like the Dicks?
The Dicks and the Subhumans went over to Enigma for an M&D deal, which is because we just had no money to put them into print, and that kind of informed that. Are we getting the hook?
No, minutes.
Take a few questions then, maybe. Okay. Any questions? Then we'll sign books in the back, I think. Yeah.
So, when I met you guys were living a Phelan, and it was like 8 people or something. Like
It was this big. Phelan was this big. Me, Joe, Davo, Chuck Dukowski. I mean, Greg Ginn, and then I made a little hut for Spot on top. And then Henry, then
like
Chuck Dukowski in the corner, and it was about a spot this big, right? And then certain people would come at night with their women. It was, are you kidding me? Come on, man! And that's where we said, "Get in the van!"
And Chuck Biscuits did get in the van.
Yeah.
He was smart.
Anyways, yeah.
So was that during the Unicorn lawsuit? Was that why you guys were all jammed in there? There was no money?
Yeah, we left. It wasn't a lawsuit yet, but we decided not to move with them to Santa Monica and moved down to where all of the electronics SST stuff was stored. All my stuff was down there, and it was like I think it was just $120 a month or something, and so I had a shower and it worked. We were reluctant to leave it, even though we outgrew it.
But that was still in the DD Detroit. I mean the
We Are the
Avengers. We Are the One. We all got together. We could sleep together. We were friendly, and unless somebody brought somebody in, which we didn't want, right? Because it was kind of, you know, not that nice. But.
Any other questions? Yeah.
It's a question for Spot. It's about Earth AD. Like, do you have any like recollection or crazy stories from recording the Misfits?
They were about as much of a pain in the ass as anyone could have been. I had to really convince Danzig that, come on, man, we need 4 more hours. You can get 4 more hours, you know, for, you know, at like about $40 an hour. I mean, come on, let's do it right. But yeah, it was pretty rough. I mean, it started off with recording the original basics at Total Access in their live room. You were there.
Yeah,
you were in there. Yeah, you had all the narration between the takes. It was great. But then I had to go out to New Jersey and help them finish the thing. Oh, New Jersey. And nothing against New Jersey, but and it was we tried to do it in this one studio, and Jerry and Doyle really wanted to just constantly be there with their hands on the board, and I'm like, you know, you can only tell people, come on, man, don't do that. Let me do this. Tell me what you want. Let me do it. And you know, it was basically 2 kids playing. You know, oh boy, I've got Tinker Toys. Watch this. That didn't work, and finally I had to go to I forget what the other studio was, and oh yeah, the worst thing that happened was in one session I did, and I think I'm recording new tracks. I forget whether recording new tracks or mixing, but it doesn't matter. But it's a pretty decent studio with stuff, and at that point, I wasn't afraid to put the needle in the red, you know, because I knew what I could get away with the right kind of tape. And, you know, I had all the levels set up, and the guy in the who was the engineer there, he decided to pull the master down. He like, they're distorting here. This is going to distort. And I looked back at the machine. Where'd my level go? And he said, well, you know, we won't take any responsibility for what you put on tape. And I said, no, I take the responsibility for what I put on tape. Get away from my fucking faders. I had him sit there, go have a soda or something. You know, I'll call you if I need your help. But you know, that might have been the worst thing that happened. Luckily none of those levels went on tape. My levels went on tape.
Well, that was, you were an important figure because you know, anyone who went into the studio and trusted a house engineer was going to get, you know, some granola hippie guy from the 70s.
Well, you know, I mean, there were some granola hippie guys from the 70s who were good, who were really good, really cool guys, and then there were, well, you know, you didn't have to be a hippie or granola or anything to be an idiot, but
we're getting the hook. So let me. Well, I just want to talk about the books. So Spot's got a real fancy, high-tone photo book.
Not that.
That thing. No, not this.
And that's Hermosa with some early Black Flag music photos. Mike Watt's in there once or twice. But this is your new thing, which is a booklet.
Yeah.
With a lot of photos as well of Hermosa, but a little more music maybe.
No, this is just more historical with text.
Okay. Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah, and which, because the original photo book I started off as being text with photos to back it up, but the guys who put it out, they wanted to do just photos, and it was such a deal that I said, well, okay, I'll go your way. We'll do it on this one, but I'm trying to get the real one that you know, I've already written about, you know, 40,000 words on it.
And Spot will be signing any books you buy, and my books are, I got all of them, but the ones that deal with SST are the Enter Naomi book about our photographer Naomi Peterson. It's my general take on the whole thing and LA itself. And Rockin' the Pop Narcotic is what I wrote after I left SST, when still nothing of the underground was in the grand historical narrative of rock and roll, and had to be put in there. And I'll also take credit for the revival of Respect for Black Sabbath, because my book was about the first one to take them seriously in 10 years maybe. And Ecology is about half music. It's got good articles about the Meat Puppets and St. Vitus and San Francisco bands and you know, people I worked with in earlier years before SST. And my latest book is about cowboy actors and the communist working class hero and who won. So I'll be signing those back there too. Anything else? Final words?
I had some, but they were surgically removed.
Hey, and Joe, you'll be at Stories, Books and Cafe,
I'll be focusing
in
on
Echo
the,
Park.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you.
And, I'm doing a film-oriented talk tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Stories with Chris D., who late in his career was on SST as well.
Divine Horseman.
But, he had his own label. You know, he reminded me something I forgot. There is a Upsetter Records glossy of Black Flag as an Upsetter Records recording artist, and the plan was to put out the Dez version of Damaged album. You know, on Christie's label in early '81.
Whoa!
Before there was any idea of Henry and the band. And it would have been so good if that had happened instead of the unicorn thing. But Mugger has final thoughts.
Oh, Spot and I will be doing a little nig heist.
Oh boy!
Booty action in the back. So if anyone wants to join us,
Yeah, get in the van.
get in the van, baby.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, you guys.
Yeah, this one.
I go
hey,
voice.
can I get one of the magazines real quick?
Yeah, take
Here,
that.
have-
No,